The winter of 1943 pressed over the occupied Polish countryside like a weight meant to break bone and will. Frost clung to every exposed surface, glazing the abandoned railway station with a silver hardness that seemed to echo the silence of a land held hostage. Dense fog drifted to the ravines, moving slowly, as if the cold had thickened the very air. And inside that cold, behind piles of rusted boilers and broken couplings, Mateusz Kroll carried out another forgotten shift. He moved like someone accustomed to being unseen. The metal groaned under his touch, as though the machinery understood the strange patience of the young mechanic who kept it alive. Mateusz was 22, though his eyes held the heaviness of someone far older. The war had stolen the softness from them. On most days, he did not speak unless spoken to, and even then his voice rarely rose above a murmur. The officers in the local resistance barely acknowledged him, except to hand him the tasks no one else wanted: scrubbing soot from old furnace pipes, scavenging scraps, repairing valves that would crack again within a week. They thought of him as harmless, replaceable, another farm boy who had stumbled into the wrong chapter of history. But under his quiet surface lived an ache that gnawed through each hour. The memory of his older brother, Janek, taken in a raid months earlier. Janek had been the brave one, the outspoken one, the one who always seemed carved for leadership. Mateusz still felt the moment of that loss like a splinter under the skin, the guilt of having him behind a collapsed shed, while Janek drew the soldiers' attention away. He had replayed that scene so many times that it no longer felt like a memory, but a wound stuck open. Every cold morning inside the abandoned station seemed to press salt into it, and still he showed up, day after day, with his hands stained by grease, his breath fogging the air, his cheap rifle slung across his back like an afterthought. The weapon had cost him $5 in the clandestine market, $5 that should have bought extra food for the winter. Instead, he had carried the rifle home, testing its weight, discovering quickly why the seller had smirked when handing it over. The barrel was slightly crooked. The trigger stuck unless pulled with absolute steadiness. The wooden stock bore a fracture patched with mismatched screws. A joke of a weapon, something that would be mocked even by children. The resistance fighters certainly mocked it. They joked that Mateusz had bought himself a shovel disguised as a gun. They said he would be more effective throwing the rifle at an enemy than firing it. Mateusz absorbed those comments the way he absorbed everything. Quietly, saying nothing, storing the sting deep enough that no one could see it. But inside him lived a strange gift, one inherited from a father who had spent long nights hunting in the dense forest before the war hollowed out their lives. His father used to say he could hear the shape of the air. Mateusz had laughed when he was younger, thinking it a poetic exaggeration from a man who felt more at home among trees and people. But as the years passed and he accompanied his father on hunts, he realized it was not poetry. Some men saw better. Some ran faster. His father listened differently. He could predict the direction a deer would leap by sensing how the wind pressed against his cheek. He could shoot before an animal emerged from the brush because he recognized the tremor of leaves, as if the forest spoke directly to him. Mateusz had inherited that odd ability, though he never named it. He only understood that he felt things others missed. A faint vibration in the ground before a cart approached, a subtle shift in wind that hinted at movement behind fog, the soft metallic echo along a rail line that told him a train was coming long before it appeared. During his lonely hours in the station, he learned to play with his perception, tapping bolts, flicking pieces of scrap metal, listening to the air carry sound with different textures depending on distance, weight, and direction. While others dismissed him, he trained himself without even knowing it was training. Yet none of this mattered. Not then. Not when every day seemed an echo of the one before it. Fog, cold, broken metal, and the steady ache of Janek's absence. The morning everything changed began in near total silence. The fog was so dense it erased the line between earth and sky. Only the faintest glow from the rising sun attempted to push through. But even that light seemed tired. Mateusz stood beneath the half-collapsed roof of the station's west platform, tightening a bolt on a steam valve, when he heard hurried footsteps approaching. He didn't look up immediately. Footsteps had many voices, relaxed, cautious, fearful, and these carried urgency, uneven breathing, the subtle thump of a man trying to stay quiet but failing. Even before the informant spoke, Mateusz knew trouble was coming. The man appeared through the fog like a figure pushed forward by panic. His coat was half unbuttoned, his face wind-burned and slick with sweat. When he finally reached the platform, he leaned against a rusted beam and delivered the news in a voice that wavered as though afraid the air itself might betray him. A German shock force was moving along the train route, planning to destroy the last supply depot belonging to the resistance. If the depot fell, hundreds of civilians hiding in the forest would have no escape. The depot fed them. It armed them. It sheltered them. Without it, they would be trapped between hunger and the retreating snow, with the Germans tightening their grip. A tension settled into the abandoned station like a presence. For a moment, Mateusz listened not to the man's words, but to the cracking of ice on the beams above, the subtle rattle of a metal sheet shifting under the breeze. He felt the air itself tightening, as if the world anticipated something. The officers dismissed Mateusz at first. He overheard the quick, heated discussions. They had no trained snipers available. The terrain was exposed. Snow betrayed every footprint, and moving through the ravines would give the Germans ample time to track and eliminate any resistance attempt. They needed time. They didn't have it. Mateusz stepped forward then. He didn't know why he spoke. Maybe it was Yannick's memory. Maybe it was a heavy realization that no one else could reach the railway fast enough. Maybe it was simply the weight of having nothing left to lose. In a quiet voice, in words the officers barely took seriously, he suggested something absurd, using the fog and the metallic echo of the tracks to turn his broken rifle into an extension of the one sense no German soldier could predict, his strange ability to read sound. The officers stared, then scoffed, then argued again. They almost ignored him entirely. But desperation has a way of opening doors that logic keeps closed. Finally, with no better option, they allowed him to try, believing in private that he would not return. As Mateusz prepared to leave the station, the fog thickening around him like a shroud, he felt the weight of Yannick's absence again. But this time it did not crush him. It steadied him. It filled him with something dangerously close to resolve. He stepped onto the frozen track, feeling the metal hum faintly beneath his boots, and let the cold air settle around him as though the world were holding its breath. The mission had begun. The fog clung to Mateusz as he moved along the deserted railway, but he welcomed it. It wrapped around him like a silent companion, muting the world into blurred shapes and muffled echoes. The snow under his boots compressed with a soft, granular crunch that felt almost too loud in the stillness of morning. Each step counted. Each breath seemed to rise in slow spirals of vapor, disappearing into the gray. He kept one hand on the cold barrel of his rifle, feeling the slight wobble in the metal, the flaw that everyone mocked, the flaw he now hoped he could turn into purpose. The ravines around the tracks deepened as he advanced. Frozen earth rose on either side like carved walls, and the fog pooled between them, moving as if alive. He scanned the surroundings not with his eyes, which could barely penetrate the haze, but with the strange sensitivity that had guided him on countless hunts with his father. A distant vibration along the rail, soft and intermittent, suggested that the German column had not yet arrived but was drawing closer. Heavy boots would transfer their rhythm into the metal long before they came into sight. The abandoned structure scattered along the railway grew more visible as he approached the old station ruins. The charred remains of a platform tower, a collapsed freight crate, the skeletal outline of what had been a storage shed. He paused there, letting the cold wind brush against his cheek as he listened. It wasn't simply listening with ears. It was listening with nerves, with instinct, with the small hairs on his arms rising as the air shifted. Far to the east, an echo trembled faintly through the fog, carried by the narrow corridor between the ravines. A metallic echo, steady, rhythmic, too disciplined to be anything but boots. The Germans were coming. Mateusz crouched beneath the shattered platform, brushing snow from the wooden planks overhead. The platform had once held luggage carts and wooden benches. Now it looked like the skeleton of some creature crushed under the weight of war. He eased himself into the shadowed space, careful not to touch the icicles hanging like crooked teeth from the ruined beams. From this position, he could feel the vibration of the tracks through his boots, through the air, through the old station walls. It was faint for now, but growing. The ground had a pulse. He steadied his rifle, exhaling slowly. He didn't think of the weapon as a firearm. He thought of it as an extension of something inside him. His fingers rested lightly on the cracked wooden stock, feeling the texture of old splinters and the imperfect join where mismatched screws held the weapon together. The cold metal bit into his palms, but he welcomed the sting. It kept him anchored. It kept him awake. He remembered his father kneeling beside him in the forest years ago, during a hunt in deep winter. "Don't watch the trees," his father had whispered. "Feel how the cold carries sound. Snow makes everything louder. It tells you where life moves." Mateusz had believed the words then, but now they returned with new clarity, like instructions meant for this exact moment. He closed his eyes briefly. The German column was still distant, but its rhythm had become clearer. A commander barking clipped orders. The subtle jangle of metal, likely weapons or canteens clattering against belts. The thud of several dozen boots moving in disciplined unison. And beneath it all, the faint squeal of a wagon axle struggling in the cold. The fog amplified it, turning each vibration into a thread that spread through the icy air. Mateusz exhaled again, adjusting his grip. The officers back at the makeshift base had dismissed his plan as a last resort fantasy. A broken rifle. A mechanic with no formal shooting training. A fog so thick that visibility dropped to a few steps. Ridiculous, they had said. But the terrain was why the Germans believed the approach safe. They expected no ambush. No resistance. Certainly not one man alone in the mist. He could use that. The first shapes materialized in the fog like ghosts. Dark silhouettes. Movement without clear form. The ravine walls funneled the sound, making each footfall ring sharper through platform beams. Mateusz remained completely still, lowering his heartbeat, letting the cold numb everything but awareness. The soldiers grew closer. 5 at first, then a dozen, then the distant outline of a larger formation behind them. He couldn't see faces, but he felt their presence as a pressure against the air. He pressed the rifle to his shoulder. The crooked barrel forced him to tilt slightly, aligning not with sight but with sensation. He didn't aim at a body. He aimed at timing, at rhythm, at the tiny gap between boots striking the ground, at the breath that followed an order. He had mapped the vibrations the way a hunter maps animal movement. The first shot cracked through the fog with startling sharpness. It wasn't a perfect shot. He didn't expect it to be. But the bullet struck not a man, but the metal badge on an officer's coat, ricocheting violently. The sound echoed along the ravine like a flare. Confusion swept the column. Shouts erupted. Boots skidded on ice. For a moment, the Germans didn't know where to look. The fog hid everything. The ricochet had made the shot seem higher, farther misplaced. And the echo of the tracks distorted the origin. Mateusz listened again. The next heartbeat. The next intake of breath. The next order shouted without confidence. He fired a second shot. This one struck the edge of a lantern, shattering the glass. Darkness swallowed part of the formation. A soldier screamed, not from pain, but from shock as burning oil splashed onto the snow near his feet. The bright flame hissed against the frost, turning into steam that fed the fog, thickening it even further until the world became a white blur of panic and metal. Mateusz's pulse quickened. The vibrations on the rail intensified as soldiers shifted position, colliding into one another, breaking formation. A commander attempted to regain control, but his voice cracked under the strain. Exactly the opening Mateusz needed. He braced himself, inhaled sharply, and fired again. The bullet struck the ground near the commander's boot, ricocheting into another soldier's canteen, producing another sharp metallic report. Chaos bloomed. The Germans scattered, blinded by fog, turning in circles, pointing rifles in the wrong direction. Some shouted for retreat. Others shouted to advance. The formation began to split, fragmenting like thin ice under stress. And through it all, Mateusz remained hidden under the broken platform, listening to the world unravel by sound alone. The enemy hadn't yet realized they were being dismantled by a single man with a crooked rifle. But that realization was coming. He could feel the shift in the air, the gathering caution, the forming suspicion. His hour of impossible work had only just begun. The fog thickened until it felt like a living curtain, swallowing every outline of the world beyond a few meters. It drifted in slow coils between the ravine walls, carrying the echoes of panic like whispers trapped inside a frozen tunnel. Mateusz stayed low beneath the shattered platform, ribs pressed against the cold earth, breath controlled and shallow. His heart beat fast but steady, like the ticking of a small engine he had learned to maintain through years of mechanical work. He listened more than he moved. Every sound now mattered. Every scrape of a boot, every crack of ice under a shifting soldier, every quick inhale of a man suddenly aware that he was being hunted by something he could not see. The Germans tried to reorganize. Their commander's voice cut through the fog, forced through clenched teeth. He barked orders that were meant to carry authority, but instead revealed urgency. Mateusz sensed in the tone a sharpness that lacked confidence, a rhythm broken by doubt. The column had assumed an easy march through an undefended stretch of railway. Now they found themselves in a trap with no visible enemy, and panic was already spreading through their ranks like frost through brittle metal. One soldier stumbled closer to the platform, his silhouette barely visible through the swirling mist. Mateusz heard the clatter of ammunition on the man's belt and the uneven drag of his feet, fear throwing off his balance. The soldier paused, exhaled sharply, and called out for his unit. His voice trembled. He was alone, though he didn't realize how close he had come to a silent death. Mateusz steadied his rifle again, letting his cheek rest against the cold wood. He waited. Timing was everything. He didn't rely on sight. He relied on vibration. The soldier's next step produced a faint tremor on the track behind him. Soft, hesitant. Mateusz fired. The bullet struck the metal rail near the soldier's boot, making a sharp, ringing crack. The man leapt back in terror, slipping on the snow and crashing onto his back. Another soldier shouted. Another slipped. A chain reaction of confusion spread through the column. More boots scrambled. More weapons clattered. The fog magnified every sound until it seemed like dozens of shooters were firing from multiple directions, when in truth there was only one. Mateusz shifted position slightly, dragging his knees over the frozen soil. He had to keep moving, even within the cramped shelter of the platform ruins. A stationary target would be found eventually, and he couldn't risk that. He pressed his ear closer to a piece of exposed rail, letting the cold metal transmit its secrets. Vibrations traveled through it like a message written in tremors. The soldiers were splitting into two groups, one attempting to advance along the track, the other retreating back the way they came. Divide the enemy. His father had said that during hunts, too, wolves, deer, even birds, they panic when forced into unpredictable movement. His father always fired at the ground first, letting sound scatter herd before choosing his target. Mateusz had never imagined he would use those lessons on men. Another burst of shouting cut through the fog. Someone had found a wounded officer whose badge had taken the first ricochet. A medic knelt beside him, examining the dent in the metal, trying to determine where the attack had come from. Their voices carried down the rails, uncertain, tense, sharp with fear. Mateusz could almost picture their darting eyes, their shaking hands. He knew that fear. He had felt it the night Janek was taken. That memory entered him now with a coldness deeper than the winter air. He saw his brother's silhouette in the firelight, saw the German soldiers dragging him away while Mateusz hid in the shadows, unable to act. He heard Janek's voice, a voice that didn't cry out, that didn't curse, but simply told him to run. That shame, that helplessness, now tightened into something sharper, a will to act where he once could not. He adjusted his rifle and positioned himself behind a collapsed steel beam that acted as both cover and amplifier. If he fired against the beam, the sound would split, bouncing toward both sides of the ravine. He waited until he heard the commander speak again, a long, sharp order. Then he fired at the beam. The shot cracked the air like lightning. To the Germans, it must have sounded like 3 shots from 3 different locations. Soldiers ducked. Some fired blindly into the fog, bullets whining off frozen stone. One man screamed as he caught friendly fire through the thigh. Another soldier shouted a warning, but the sound dissolved into panic. Their formation broke entirely now, soldiers scattering in different directions, slipping on ice, colliding with one another. The ravine echoed with chaos. Mateusz fired again, a deliberate miss. Another shot aimed at metal, not flesh. Fragmented echoes spread down both sides of the rails. He heard the Germans turning, shouting conflicting commands. He listened closely to each voice, memorizing their rhythms, predicting their next moves. The enemy hadn't realized yet that he was controlling the battlefield the way a machinist manipulates gears inside a complex mechanism. Every vibration was a cog, every echo a lever, every panic-stricken movement a chain reaction. He saw shapes in the fog begin to retreat. Some soldiers dragged the wounded. Others fled outright, abandoning the center of the formation. The commander shouted for them to hold position, but his voice cracked again, the tone of a man realizing he was losing more than control. He was losing the ground beneath his feet. Mateusz steadied his hands. He could end this segment of the column. He could buy the resistance the time they needed. He inhaled slowly, letting the cold freeze the air inside his lungs. Then he fired at the commander's voice. The bullet didn't hit the man. It struck a metal buckle near him, exploding in a sharp, ringing tone that made the officer stagger back in shock. Soldiers rushed to him, shouting, disorganized, afraid. Their last attempt to regroup shattered. The Germans broke, fully, irrevocably, and as their retreating footsteps echoed to the fog, Mateusz stayed motionless beneath the ruined platform, rifle held steady, heart beating with a mix of fear, grief, and something he didn't yet recognize. The slow, rising sense that he had crossed the threshold, that the path ahead would demand even more than this moment of impossible precision. The fog shifted again. The air changed. Something darker was coming. This first wave had been only the beginning. The fog had swallowed the retreating soldiers, but the silence they left behind did not feel like victory. It felt like the pause between storms. A cold, waiting stillness. Mateusz stayed crouched beneath the shattered platform, eyes narrowed, attention sharpened to the smallest sound. His breath drifted upward in thin white streams, vanishing into wood above him. Somewhere beyond the fog, wind whispered against branches, carrying with it the distant growl of engines. Heavy ones, not the light transport trucks of the first column. Reinforcements. He felt the shift in the steel before he heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor humming through the frozen rails. A deeper vibration, heavier, rhythmic in its own way. Tanks? No, not heavy enough. But armored transports. Perhaps vehicles with reinforced frames. Whatever they were, they carried men who would not scare easily. Men who had trained for the chaotic conditions of the Eastern Front. Men who would not be fooled twice by ricochets and phantom echoes. The fog no longer protected him. It trapped him. He slid backward, trying to reposition, but the space under the platform was cramped. His shoulder brushed against a jagged beam and he froze, listening. The fog magnified even small sounds. He couldn't afford to give away his location now. A minute passed, then another. The cold seeped into his bones, numbing his fingers. He forced himself to endure it, to welcome it. Cold slowed the pulse. Cold sharpened the mind. The vibrations intensified. Vehicles rolled into the ravine, engines muffled by the fog, their sound pressed downward by the confined stone walls. Doors slammed. Boots hit the ground. Heavier, synchronized, more controlled than the previous group. These soldiers moved with purpose. The officers barked orders that didn't waver. They spread out immediately, sweeping the area with measured steps. Mateusz pressed his palm against the rail again. The air carried fewer frantic movements now. Only structure and discipline. A different beast than the first. He had minutes to decide what to do. He closed his eyes and listened harder. The vehicles had stopped roughly 100 meters from the ruined station. The soldiers fanned out in two wings, using the ravine walls as natural cover. They weren't advancing blindly like the earlier column. They were methodical, calculating, experienced. A reconnaissance team approached, their footsteps light but purposeful. 3 men, possibly 4. The crunch of their boots on the snow revealed careful spacing. 1 man to the left, 1 to the right, 1 trailing behind. They swept their rifles side to side, cutting arcs through the fog. Mateusz tightened his grip on the rifle. He knew he couldn't fight this group with ricochets and echoes alone. They would triangulate him the moment he fired twice from the same angle. Worse, they would expect an ambush now. Every instinct told him to fall back, retreat into the forest, and vanish as if he had never stood here. But retreat meant leaving the depot defenseless. It meant letting the armored transport roll through, crush the last food stores, and expose the hidden civilians to certain death. He thought of Yannick, of the night his brother had been dragged away, shouting for him to run. He had run then, but not now, not again. He crawled to the far edge of the platform, teeth gritted against the cold metal scraping his palms. From there, he could feel a slight shift in the air, a draft sweeping down from a collapsed ventilation shaft above. He paused, listening. Snow fell through the crack in soft, intermittent flakes, landing around him like silent ash. There, beneath the snow, beneath the fog, a new vibration, a faint, slow rhythm. Someone was approaching alone. A commander, maybe, or a squad leader moving to inspect the area before sending his men forward. Mateusz's father had always said, the leader's steps were the silence's deepest. And the silence here had grown heavy, almost intentional. He steadied his breath and angled the rifle upward. This shot wouldn't be a ricochet. It wouldn't be a trick. It had to be precise, even with the crooked barrel. He listened, measured the weight of each footstep, counted the pause when the man inhaled, felt the shift in air pressure as the figure came within 10 meters. Then Mateusz fired. The shot tore through the fog and struck something solid. A body, not metal. A heavy grunt followed, then the thud of a man collapsing onto snow. A sharp gasp erupted from others nearby. Not panic, but focused alarm. The soldiers converged instantly, their boots pounding the earth in unison. Mateusz slid back as bullets shredded the edges of the platform above, splinters raining down like wooden hail. The soldiers fired intelligently, not randomly like the first group. They probed, testing angles, watching for movement. One bullet struck, so close to his elbow that the shock wave numbed his arm. He clutched the rifle, pressing himself as flat as possible. He needed a new position. Now, the snow beneath him was shallow, the earth beneath that was frozen but fractured. He crawled toward the collapsed section of the platform where broken planks created a narrow gap leading into the service tunnels beneath the station, a space barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Bullets cracked overhead again. Shouts grew louder. The reconnaissance team had pinpointed the rough direction of the shot. They were closing in. Mateusz plunged into the gap. The wood groaned, but held. His shoulders scraped against splintered planks, tearing through his coat. Cold soil smeared his hands. The tunnel below was even darker than the fog above, but he felt its air currents slipping across his face, guiding him. He lowered himself into the narrow passage, boots dangling until they found frozen ground. Above him, German voices echoed through the boards. They swept the platform, kicked debris, prodded the walls with bayonets. One soldier crouched so close overhead that Mateusz could see his shadow through the cracks. He pressed himself deeper into the tunnel. The darkness felt alive, pulsing with danger, but it also wrapped around him like a shield. Down here, the sounds carried differently, sharper, bouncing off stone and small, contained echoes he could read with clarity. A plan formed, not one of desperation, but one built on instinct, on memory, on experience he never knew he'd been gathering. He tightened his grip on the rifle. If the fog was his first ally, the tunnels would be his second. The service tunnel breathed cold air through narrow cracks, like the earth exhaling beneath the ruined station. Mateusz moved the cramped passage with slow, controlled motions, one hand brushing the frozen soil as he listened. Every sound above him, boots scraping wood, clipped commands, metal striking metal, mapped the enemy's positions more clearly than sight ever could. The second German unit was different from the first. Their steps were firm, their voices steady. These men would not be fooled by simple echoes. He reached a bend in the tunnel where two narrow branches split. One collapsed in darkness, blocked by rubble. The other sloped toward a rusted maintenance hatch he remembered repairing weeks earlier. If he could reach it, he might surface behind the German scouts before they discovered the tunnel entrance. But as he approached the hatch, he sensed heavy footsteps moving directly above it. Two soldiers sweeping the area with deliberate caution. He pushed the hatch gently. The metal hinge groaned softly. Too soft for sight, but not too soft for trained ears. The soldiers froze. Mateusz didn't move. He counted their breaths, the difference in weight between their feet, the slight tilt in one man's stance as he leaned forward. The soldiers lowered themselves, inspecting the snow. If they found the hatch, the tunnels would become a death trap. He pushed once more. Slow. Steady. Snow slipped through the opening, dusting his coat. He lifted himself out and rolled behind a half-buried crate, just as one of the soldiers approached the hatch. The fog had thinned, but it still muted shapes enough for him to stay hidden. He steadied his crooked rifle, breath quiet, pulse sharp as wire. He fired. The bullet struck the crate's corner, ricocheting upward in a violent metallic crack. The soldier stumbled back, slipping on the snow. His partner whirled and fired toward the echo, not realizing he faced only one attacker. Their shot sliced the fog, biting into wood and stone. Mateusz shifted to another patch of debris. Firing again, another ricochet off a broken rail. The sound multiplied to the ravine, bouncing between stone walls. German voices rose in confusion as their formation tried to adjust. A third rifle shot from deeper in the fog. Friendly fire, misdirected in the chaos, added panic to their movements. The commander shouted for order, but the tone carried strain. The ravine now belonged to echoes, not discipline. Mateusz felt the tension building the moment the unit would try one final coordinated push. He positioned himself behind a cracked pillar, pressed the rifle against the cold stone, and fired directly into the rail. The impact rang through the metal like a bell, vibrating across the entire corridor. Soldiers jerked away instinctively. A frontline scout slipped, colliding with another man. Their formation folded in a single shuddering motion. Then came the command he had been waiting for: retreat. Engines rumbled to life. Boots pounded the snow. The armored vehicles reversed down the ravine, swallowed slowly by the fog. Less than a minute later, only silence remained. Mateusz lowered his rifle, shoulders dropping as the weight of the hours settled over him. His body ached from cold and strain, but he stood, climbed the ravine, and walked through the aftermath. The scattered footprints, broken lanterns, and the faint smell of burned oil mixing with the clean morning air. The fog lifted at last. Pale sunlight spread across the rails, turning frost to silver. The depot was safe. The civilians in the forest would live. The resistance, unaware of the exact shape of the miracle, would survive another winter. Mateusz looked at his crooked rifle. Still cheap, still flawed, but now altered by meaning. A tool shaped by instinct and stubborn hope more than precision. He slung it over his shoulder and walked the long road back, boots crunching softly over the clearing snow. No applause followed him. No commander waited. Only the quiet truth he carried. Some victories echo only in the hearts of those who survived them.